Hello and welcome back to Cooking the Books with me, Gilly Smith, the podcast which takes us through 4 food moments from the books of our favourite food writers. It's about life through the prism of food. And this week, as the schools get ready for the long summer holidays, I'm with the woman everyone needs to pop in their suitcase if they're heading to France, Carolyn Boyd.
Pas-de-Têt's got a very strong food culture, and it's just there across the sea. There's a estaminet culture, which is their sort of version of a sort of tavern bistro. There's very particular dishes you wouldn't see anywhere else.
Carolyn has guided me through the best food destinations, and therefore the best destinations in France for the last couple of years through her articles in the press. And now her first book, Amuse Bouche, How to Eat Your Way Around France. Our trip to Hauts de France last month took us to a part of the country that most of us scoot past en route to what we may think are more interesting destinations. I asked her if opening the door to a whole new experience of a more hidden France through food was her plan.
Yes, I think I have gathered all of this information through so many years and seen underneath the surface of what a lot of other people see, because I've met all the producers, I've met the chefs, I've met the bakers, and they just give you a whole different side of France that you don't get when you're just passing through. And I think that's the beauty of seeing France through its food, because if you understand the food, you understand everything about France, really. It tells you the history, it tells you the landscape, it tells you the culture, it tells you so much, because it's woven through everything in the country. It's everything, you know.
It is everything, and we're speaking on the morning after the night before when France was saved from Marine Le Pen and her gang, and we're feeling very grateful for that, because it matters, doesn't it? It matters that we know the countries that we visit. It's, you know, we do have access to the politics because we have all our political correspondents, you know, translating all that. You do the same with food. You translate. You speak perfect French, obviously, and you've spent a lot of time, at probably 20 years or so.
Yeah.
You've written about France in The Guardian, The Times, National Geographic Traveller and BBC Good Food. You know your onions. Now, I want to talk about our little trip. So we had to go over and vaccinate the dogs because they've got pet passports, and British vets would nullify. Would you believe that? They would literally nullify a pet passport if they even wrote in it. So we have to go to France to get our rabies stamps.
Wow.
Unbelievable. Thank you, Brexit. But we didn't want to go too far, so we went to Hauts de France, which we probably wouldn't have stopped off in if it hadn't been for you. So just tell us about the Hauts de France and why you feel so strongly about why people shouldn't just go past it.
This was almost a recent discovery for me, probably in the last 10 years rather than 20, because people do just drive through. And even as close as the seafront in Calais, you can have the most amazing bag of chips. I mean, you could sit there on the beach looking at the white cliffs of Dover with the best bag of chips I think I've ever had. And like a choice of about 20 dips. It's not just ketchup or mayo here. You know, I had this one I wrote about in the book as well, Stumi, I think it was called, and it was like this lovely onion kind of ketchup, and I was like, flipping it, this is amazing. You know. Then if you go a little bit further, either down the coast towards sort of Montreuil-sur-Mer and Le Croitoy and Saint-Valery sur Somme. This is a really lovely, amazing spot at the Somme estuary, and that's where I did the foraging with Renette, who showed me all these sea vegetables, because we eat samphire. I mean, everyone knows about samphire, but in that area there's all sorts of different plants you can eat. And there's the chef there, Pascal Lefebvre, he specialises in cooking with them. And then you've got fantastic seafood. You've got in Boulogne. Boulogne I hadn't been to since I was 14, and then in the last couple of, I think the year before last, I went 3 times to Boulogne, and suddenly, Boulogne it's fantastic for food.
Well,
you know?
Let's just break down just that little lot. Montreuil, you said that the market is fantastic, so we went along there, and you talk about one of the rock star chefs. He's number 48 in the top 50 in the world, Alexandre Gauthier, and his restaurant was actually closed that time, but you pointed us to another of his restaurants called Sur Mer in Merlimont, which is literally around the corner from where we were staying. Now, we were only staying there because of all those recommendations that I'd read in that bit of your book. But it really was the most fabulous experience. And it wasn't just the food. It was, we opened the door at Sur Mer and we bumped into real France. it was the French people on a Friday night with all their kids and their dogs, and we could take our dogs too. It was like the best party we bumped into, and we wouldn't have known it was there. So yes, we get the rock star chef. Wasn't there, of course, but but we get that vibe and we get that sense of what French eating is all about. It is about dogs and kids and not making too much of a big deal about it. It is about genuinely loving going out and eating together. That is inaccessible to most people unless you know where to go, isn't it?
Yes, I guess so. And I was quite careful to name the chefs in the book so that if restaurants moved on or closed, or they found, things change very quickly in the restaurant world. And that was why I was very careful to name the chefs in each instance, so that people could, if so happened they might be reading the book in 5 years' time, they would still be able to find that chef, hopefully. And if they're in the same place, brilliant, but they might have opened somewhere new.
Exactly. And we went to Pascal Lefebvre as well, and that was a real find. And the price of these places, when you know where to go in France, it always astounds me. We had the most amazing food, really, with wine, all the Amuse Bouche, and it cost us 45 quid each. That's what's so beautiful, isn't it? And I love the fact that they don't overcharge like they do here. They don't make food such a sort of aspirational, kind of thing that it becomes out of most people's league. It's the price reflects the fact that most people want to eat, and it was absolutely full on a Saturday lunchtime.
And that's the thing, a lunchtime menu will be often more affordable. And so I recommend often, if you stay in a self-catering place, you can eat out really well at lunchtime, and then you can go to the market and all the lovely shops, the charcuterie, the fromagerie, the boulangerie, and collect your evening meal. And you barely need to cook. You just put out a spread of all those lovely things, and you can taste the region that way as well. It doesn't always have to be restaurants. It's experiencing France in all its sort of foodie ways.
Yes, absolutely. Let's start to go through some of your food moments. The first one, the Festival of the Pink Onion, mid-August in Roscoff. Now, when I read this, I realised that I'd been to a lot of these places and I knew nothing. I had literally spent a week in Brittany and I just hadn't even touched the surface.
So if you think of a typical Frenchman, he will have a beret, he will have a striped shirt, and more often than not for British people, he will have a string of onions around his neck. And if you said that to a Parisian, they would be, what are you talking about? Where even is Roscoff? But for us, this all comes from the history of the onion johnnies. So from the early 19th century, this area of Finistère was so poor that taking their produce to Paris was, by road was just impossible. So it was actually easier to cross the channel, because they were all fishermen as well, to sell their onions door to door. And this is why we have the image of the Frenchman with the bicycle, with the onions, because they were between sort of 1820s and the Second World War, they got up to like Orkney. It was an extraordinary spread of these onion johnnies. They were called onion johnnies because they were all called Jean-Michel, Jean-Marie, Jean-Pierre, and that's why they all became the onion johnnies, Jean. So this was a really big thing, actually. For most people throughout that time, they were the only foreigner anyone saw. And they started in Wales, actually, because the Breton language is very similar to Welsh. So the numbers are almost identical, counting in Breton and Welsh. So they could barter well enough. But it spread all the way through. Even Winston Churchill had a onion johnny call round. This is a really strong history in Roscoff. There's a little museum called the House of the Onion Johnnies. There's the little chapel where their families would wave them off. And then, of course, there's the festival in mid-August, which is celebrating the onion in its sort of wider sense, because there's a brotherhood, beautiful costumes they have, like pink and black costumes, and they celebrate all the produce of the region, actually, because that's a really fascinating area for produce. The terroir is wonderful for growing vegetables. So,
and actually that led to the establishment of Brittany ferries, which everybody's been on.
Yeah, so in the 1970s, Roscoff gained its deep port after much wrangling from the farmers there. And then nobody wanted to sail from there in a commercial sense. So the farmers themselves chartered a boat and shipped all their produce over to the UK. And so it's thanks to Brittany Ferries we had the onions and cauliflower and all sorts of incredible vegetables. And as time went on, the tourists were taking the boat back, and it's sort of grown into being a reverse, really.
Yeah, and it also is about the relationship between the producers and markets.
I think the French themselves, on a community level, are extremely good at promoting their own produce. So you've got these brotherhoods, and I met so many brotherhoods. The Brotherhood of the Pink Onion in Roscoff, the Brotherhood of the Giant Omelette in Bessières, the Brotherhood of, well, just you name it, there's a brotherhood.
The cassoulet.
Yeah, the cassoulet. Between them and other local organisations, they're all fantastic at protecting their own food. And actually, when I was reading Elizabeth David a few times, I was thinking, but they're protecting it better now than they ever have, I think, because of these networks.
And also because of the threat of, well, ultra-processed food on a multinational level. We know that junk food is creeping into all these stable
Absolutely.
food cultures, Italy, Spain, France. Maybe those movements, those brotherhoods are really sort of ramping up their activity to protect those really important food cultures. Do you think, is that what you found?
Well, it depends on the product, actually. There was a few places the brotherhoods were kind of struggling to find new members, but that was things like the tarte tatin, which doesn't really need much protection. We all know about the tarte tatin and the chouquette. I think they're struggling for new members in the Loire Valley there.
And your second food moment is all about cheese.
Comté, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that, because it is so important, isn't it, that people really understand the terroir of the cheeses. I mean, how much are the producers involved in communicating that, or do they not even really bother because they know the French understand how important that is?
I think Comté is one of the ones who are doing very well, even internationally, in promoting their cheese. But I think in other areas, I realised how they'd saved cheeses from the brink of extinction in many cases. So that's why Aligot is so popular now, because the cooperative there have done such a great job of promoting Aligot throughout France, especially, obviously, and then in the world. And then Epoisse was very close to dying out after the Second World War, and that's a very well-known cheese now. So I think it really depends on the product. But with Comté, it's just the most extraordinary area. And what I loved about researching that part was that you can see the food from the landscape. So when you're standing there looking out over the Jura prairies, these huge prairies where the Montbéliard and Simmental cows graze, you can see the cheese being made even from that stage. So to make one wheel of Comté, 45 kilograms, they're these huge wheels, you need 400 litres of milk. And so that's a huge amount for the cows to be eating to produce that milk. And so these great prairies are where that happens. There's 30 different plants of flowers, herbs that they graze on, and that flavour goes into the Comté. And the particular thing about Comté as well is that every single wheel is different, because it's different weather, different cows, different herbs, so which is great. If you find your favourite, it's almost a shame because you're never going to get it again. But also it just means you can just keep eating Comté till you find more that you like and all the different flavour profiles. Yeah,
so it really does, by understanding that relationship between terroir and the cheese, you really appreciate the landscape. Corsica as well. I haven't been to Corsica. It's one of the few places in France that I haven't actually been to. And again, this is very much to do with sort of accessing a whole new layer through its food. Tell us about this food moment.
The thing about Corsica is, I mean, a lot of the things I'm talking about readers might think, oh, well, I'm not going to do that. That's too difficult. How do I know where these people are? But with Corsica, it's completely laid out. There's this Route de Sens Authentique network, and all the producers are signposted. There's a map you can find. There's a website you can access to find who's where. And they're welcoming to people coming to see them make their cheese, their charcuterie, their honey, grow their vegetables. And Corsica is one of the places I think is most interesting in terms of its contrast between the tourism side and how the food really tells you about Corsica, because the population increases tenfold in the summer. So they've got to feed, 10 times more people over the summer. So a lot of the food is imported from the mainland or around the world. And so to really eat proper Corsican food, you have to actually properly look for it. And this network is fantastic for guiding you towards doing that. So I was zipping through these hairpin bends to find charcuterie makers, driving through the oak and chestnut forests where the pigs were grazing. I said hello to the pigs on the way. And then the cheesemakers. I had a fantastic morning with this cheesemaker who showed me his whole operation. Broccio is that you have to go before June to get the proper broccio, because it's produced by sheep who don't produce milk in the summer because it's too dry. And that's just used in everything. But this fantastic farmer, he showed me all around and it was fantastic. And if he said, here, try a bit. And the broccio was still warm from them making it. And I said, oh, it's delicious. And he goes, yeah, of course it's delicious. Like, shut up, what are you talking about? And then he offered me a drink and I was like, oh, coffee with, coffee please. And he was like, what? No, don't, what? And then, a water. And I thought, oh, I'm really annoying him. And then he got out the wine and it was 10 o'clock in the morning. And I was like, oh, that's why he didn't want to make me a coffee or give me a water. We're having a muscat pétillant at 10 a.m. And we had a great little chat about life, the universe and broccio.
And that is the point, isn't it? Everyone who loves food, and that is pretty much everyone in France, it's not a financial exchange. I really, really want to live in a culture just for a time. I know I can only get 90 days at a time now, but I just am desperate to live in a culture where it's just normal to hang out and chat about food over a drink, even if it's at 10 a.m. in the morning. It's so different from what we have in this country. In all the conversations you've had, have you managed to get a handle, from listening to Cooking the Books for years, that I am always on the hunt for trying to understand how we lost our connection and how everybody else seems to have it. What did you get from all these producers about why they are so connected?
Well, I think our own history goes so far back that it's almost out of touch, pre-industrial era. But then I think also, would we have had with our climate the variety and the terroir and the space, the space they have for grazing these cows for Comté and all the rest. I'm not sure we've lost as much as they have, if you see what I mean. Yeah, and I think that was the joy of my research. People going, what, l'anglaise? Why is an anglaise coming to me? What? They just loved the fact that I was interested in what they did, but some of them just a bit like confused, like, why are you doing this,
for English readers as well.
And once I sort of said, this is how you get to understand France really properly, and I'm a bit tired about writing about best beaches every year, this is the route to finding the real France.
Did they get it at that point? Did they sort of realise, was there a sense that they know that our food culture is slightly improving, that people are interested?
Well, the cheese, all the people I met who worked with cheese, whether cheese sellers or cheese makers, they were actually like, English, British cheese is, it's fantastic. But then the next clincher is, but because of Brexit, we're not going to import it. We're not going to sell it. So it was tinged with sadness, actually, a lot of the time.
Yeah, even more disappointment in the Brits. Let's pop down to the Basque cuisine for your fourth food moment. The Piment d'Espelette. This is about regional cuisines and how different they all are.
I think that's the thing with French food. From a distance, you will think about the menus you would see in a Parisian bistro and those dishes, you know, steak frites, you know, steak tartare, all those kind of things, you know. And when you dig down into the regions, of course you do get those things very widely. But once you get into the regions, whether it's Brittany, Nord-Pas-de-Calais, I mean, Nord-Pas-de-Calais has got a very strong food culture, and it's just there across the sea. There's a estaminet culture, which is their sort of version of a sort of tavern bistro. There's very particular dishes you wouldn't see anywhere else. But the Basque Country, it's unique, and a lot of it is because of this piment d'Espelette, which is a very mild chili pepper, and they put it in everything. And it's quite unusual because the French don't really like the heat of chili that we've become used to with curries and everything. But they have got a dish called achoa, and that's like a veal stew, and they put it in that, and that's quite warm. And you see them strung across the houses in these strings called ristra. The tradition goes that a family would get through a string of 20 piment d'Espelette in a year, and they would string them up to dry them. But when you're driving through, I saw these hills where people just were growing them everywhere, and I could see them all laid out in their sort of farmyards, drying, and they're so bright red that you can spot them a mile off, because it was the autumn when this process is happening. And when I finally got to the Atelier de Piment, they showed me how they grow them in these little sort of, they look a bit like vines, they're quite low down, you know, lines of plants, and how they dry them. And the smell was just amazing in their drying room. And then they grind it up into this powder, or they use it in jelly, or all sorts of different products. And it's loved throughout France. Chefs throughout France will sprinkle piment d'Espelette on lots of dishes. Instead of sort of cayenne pepper, it's got the same sort of level of heat. So it's loved throughout the country, but the Basque Country is really where you see it very strongly represented.
Yeah. I mean, does it feel like, I mean, you've been doing this for so long, does it feel like you've only still touched the surface? Because finds like that, how many more of those are there to be had, do you think? Are those, is it about, you know, the terroir, the people, and that sort of local feeling of identity? Or is that being diluted so much that actually you're less and less likely to find local produce?
No, I think there could be like 3 sequels to this. There is so much. I'd written 2/3 of the subjects I wanted to cover, and I'd almost got to the word count, and so I had to start cutting while I was writing. It was, yeah. My original list was about 300, and then it got down to about 180, and then the cheeses as well. There's so many. There's just, and it's like when you hear about one in this area, they'll tell you about that next one in the next valley, and oh, well, I have to come back for that one next time. And
like what, Carolyn? Give us an example of just one that you had to miss out.
So Le Puy-en-Velay. So I was in this most extraordinary town, sort of geographically. There's these basalt pillars in the middle of the city. One's got a statue on it, another one's got a chapel on it. The Puy-en-Velay, everyone knows about Puy lentils. And while I was driving, I was thinking, it's really out of the way, Le Puy-en-Velay. It's not easy to get to at all. And I was sort of thinking, what was my angle going to be? Because everyone can buy these anywhere. And then I drove there and I was like, oh my goodness, this landscape is extraordinary. That's why you should go to Le Puy-en-Velay, whether you eat the blooming lentils or not. But then they kept telling me about these other lentils in Saint-Flour, which is actually a bit easier to get to because that's just off the motorway through the Massif Central. But there's blonde lentils there, so I didn't have a chance to go and speak to any lentil farmers there. And I just thought, there's so much, and they're so proud of it. I just love it.
Thanks for listening. Head over to Substack for extra bites from Carolyn, including a mini guide to the best of France through its food. And I'll see you next week.